You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. This episode, as you may have guessed, we are talking about Gothic Lolita. We're going to be looking at the history of the subculture, the crossover, and relevance to the goth community. We're going to talk about how the fashion works, whether or not there is music related to it, basically everything around what it means to be a Gothic Lolita. We also have an album review, we've got Sinister Suggestions, and a bunch of other stuff. So our guest this episode is Chelsea, who you may know better as Rose Nocturnalia on YouTube. She's been doing videos for many years at this point, talking both about her experience as a goth and her experience as a Gothic Lolita. So I think she is more than well equipped to educate myself on the subculture. So let's just get right into it. Let's start off with introductions. Chelsea, if you don't mind, let us know a bit about yourself, how you were first introduced to goth, and where Gothic Lolita kind of came into the picture for you.
Alrighty, so I guess when I was probably about 10, 11-ish, like those really awkward tween years, I spent way too much time on the internet because my dad's in the tech field and he just gave me a PC and he's like, here's the internet, go forth and learn everything, which may have been a gigantic mistake. And there were these older girls in my neighborhood who, at the time, I thought they were like the pinnacle of maturity, but they're like 16. But they had crushed velvet and eyeliner and chunky shoes, and they listened to what I presume was like dark wave or something on their boombox in their front lawn. And I was like, oh my God, I need to be them.
Yeah.
So I started they gave me some of their like stuff secondhand, which was really nice of them. And I started Googling like, what is goth? What is this crushed velvet thing? And why do they wear it? And I got sucked in really fast. And since I was 11, I decided that I was going to like evangelize the truth of the goth gospel to people. So I decided to take to like the Neopets boards and tell people that Amy Lee wasn't really a goth. I'm pretty sure I still have screen caps of myself from that age where I'm like, I totally owned that guy. Man, look how smart I am. God. And then around the same time, since I had, unbridled access to the internet and Angel Fire and Tripod and all that, I found Visual K on LiveJournal. And then I saw like they had all these crazy outfits and they made this weird music. And I was like, okay, so this is like also goth, but they're Japanese. So it's cool by default because I was really into anime. And then that's how I discovered Lolita fashion. And then the rest is all history
cool.
from there. Like I stayed obsessed.
Yeah. I've got my recommendation at the end of the episode is actually an anime. So maybe we can have a little anime chat afterwards.
Sweet.
Actually, you know what? I should ask because it's been a while since we've talked about Toronto. What's your, well, I guess nobody really has a local scene right now, but what's your general experience of the alternative scene up there as far as access to events and how big the turnouts are and what kind of music gets played and that kind of stuff?
So it's a pretty lively community. I wouldn't say that it's huge, considering Toronto's a fairly large city, and it's got a pretty established scene that's been here for a long time. So it seems like it's kind of small or smaller than it should be, but it's tight knit. Everyone knows each other and has been established in the community for a long time, which is good, but also bad because everyone is up in each other's business and has been for the past 20 years. So that can make things real awkward. But like turnout for events is pretty good generally. And I think it's still pretty alive. We'll see what happens after everything's fully opened again, because we lost one of our major venues, so that was a big blow.
I've been starting to see those pop up the last few weeks in random places, music venues saying, hey, we're going to shut down. And I feel like that's only going to become more common, which is really upsetting because I feel like it was only 3 or 4 years ago, maybe, Trey. I don't know. You could tell me what you think, at least around here, that it felt like, and online in general, it felt like a lot of people were saying, "Hey, there's no club scene anymore. Nobody wants to go out and pay for music, and nobody wants to go out and buy drinks and see DJs." And then it felt like the last few years that's really expanded. So it sucks
Oh
that
yeah.
it's been shut down completely now.
Yeah, it's been pretty rough.
Yeah.
It's really sad to see this effect of this on the artistic community in general, not just music, but any arts and creatives community that thrive in public spaces and interacting with the wider public in person.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been rough seeing that, and I've been missing going out and being a part of it as well.
Yeah. Well, Chelsea, I'm very excited to have you on for a few well, I mean, I've told you a few times, I think, that I love your channel and I've watched it over the years, and I think my favorite thing is that you don't put out videos just to put out videos. It feels like you always have an important, often controversial topic that you very thoughtfully address, which I really enjoy in the kind of like media that I consume. But I'm also excited because I don't know shit about Gothic Lolita, and so that's kind of been a whole a big hole, I guess, in the podcast canon, as it were. And so I'm really excited to learn myself, but to also kind of get some information out there as well. So I guess coming from a place of complete ignorance, I wanted to start by asking you to kind of explain, give us an overview of the history of Gothic Lolita, and then any sort of, I don't know, relevant milestones in its biography over the years.
Yeah, sure thing. So I guess to most Goths here, we don't have a whole lot of familiarity with Gothic Lolita or even like the Japanese actual Goth scene. So there's a lot of like misconceptions and things that aren't really well understood and that get lost in translation. So I guess just a super quick rundown is that it actually kind of evolved in the 1970s. So it
Oh,
goes
wow.
back pretty far. And it kind of started off with these Japanese brands that really embraced like a kind of cutesy, preppy, girly style. Didn't exactly look like the Victorian cupcake poof that we associate it with it now. And it kind of borrowed a little bit from like the punk scene. Like Vivienne Westwood was always really, really big in Japan. So there was always that influence there. It was a little bit subversive, but it wasn't too crazy looking. And then kind of through the 80s and 90s, it started to evolve, especially because Japan's economy was it was going through some stuff, basically, and there was a little bit of social upheaval. Girls started to kind of feel like they were being pressured into social roles that they didn't want. And Lolita fashion kind of came out of this idea where it's like they wanted to be able to indulge themselves and feel pretty and have fun with friends and like look cute just for the sake of it and not because they're expected to do certain things at certain milestones in their lives. So it's like I feel like people kind of try to say that it's like super rebellious and feminist. It's like it was kind of tenuous. Like it was rebellious, but it was more of a whole like living for yourself and embracing that rather than the alternative. And then so Gothic Lolita is just one type of Lolita fashion, and it came about kind of more in the 90s because even like worldwide goth was kind of trending at that point. So it naturally spilled over a little bit. And Japan always had its own goth scene as well, but they were pretty separated from the Gothic Lolita scene. They don't really like each other a whole lot, but I digress. So Gothic Lolita arose like kind of in the late 90s, and it was basically taking the cutesy aspect but make it spooky. So, black velvet, platforms, fishnets, sulky expressions, etc. And it had a lot of kind of Victorian influence. And over the 2000s to the present, it's kind of like ebbed, or not ebbed and flowed, like waxed and waned in popularity. Like it's come in and out of fashion, but it's always had its people who are super devoted to that look. And I feel like the kind of original origin story for the fashion about how it was just like is kind of a little bit of a rebellious thing. That's kind of been lost, and now people just wear it for funsies. So yeah, that's kind of the rundown.
How much truth is there to I don't remember where I read this. It may have been no, I don't remember, but how much truth is there to the statement that Mana kind of originated that style?
It's kind of hard to say. Like, he was hugely influential, but Gothic was already sort of its own thing before he, intervened. But he put his own type of Gothic out there, and his version of Gothic Lolita and his vision is kind of what became the dominant one, and that's the one that comes into everyone's mind when they think Gothic Lolita. They think of someone who looks like Mana. So he's probably like the most influential, but he didn't totally originate it himself. He just put his own spin onto it.
I think I saw in one of your videos you said he has his own fashion line as well. Is that am I remembering that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in 1999 he started Moi Moitié, which is the most recognizable Gothic Lolita brand, and it's kind of considered like the expensive premium one that everyone wants to have, and it's kind of like the iconic Gothic Lolita look. That most, like, if someone didn't know what Gothic Lolita was, or they didn't know the details, but you asked them to picture Gothic Lolita, they would think of something from Moi Moitié.
Okay.
So that's his contribution.
Okay. Cool. So can you brought this up already, but can you, I guess, delineate and clarify a little bit about the differences between Japanese Goth and Gothic Lolita? I'm assuming that Goth in Japan is basically just Goths who live in Japan, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, they have their own pretty small goth scene. It's kind of like everywhere else in the world, where currently, like, they've lost all of their major venues and they're just kind of forced to have nights and one-offs in like little nightclubs. And it's pretty death rock focused. It's been around since the 80s, and a lot of the bands that were active in the 80s kind of went silent by the late 90s and 2000s, and then they are going through their own death rock revival, actually, which is pretty cool. So it's pretty much exactly the same as goth anywhere else. Gothic Lolita doesn't really have a whole lot to do with the goth scene at all, because it's just kind of a fashion thing for a lot of people, rather than necessarily involving the whole goth clubbing lifestyle, goth music, etc. Although there's some that, mix the two, but I would say the majority aren't what we would consider goth over here, aside from maybe they like spooky stuff and vampires, of course, because who doesn't?
Right. People that are lame. That's about
exactly.
All right. Well, so I guess one of the other things I wanted to clarify, this is all just clarification because I don't know anything. So the only time I think that I mentioned Gothic Lolita on the podcast, I had referenced a sociology paper from 2009, because it's generally where I start when I'm researching a subculture. I'll start with academic papers and then look for other sources. And actually, when I was prepping for this show, I was reading The Art of Gothic by Natasha Scharf, and she uses the same term as well. But it was the shortening of Gothic Lolita to Goth Lolly. Except when I said that on the podcast, like, I don't know, a year or so ago, I got a lot of feedback that was like, you can't say that. So can you explain to me what the problem with that is?
Yeah, I remember seeing that in that book too, and I was just like, oh no, you were doing so good. So it's not necessarily like awful to say, it's just really, really outdated. Like, in Japanese, apparently, I'm not a language expert, so don't come for me. But apparently in Japanese, they like to shorten and contract things to make it easier. So basically the shortening of Gothic Lolita in Japanese shortens to what would translate to Goth Loli. And it seems like there, and in like non-English speaking countries, like they still use that abbreviation and it has no bad connotations. But in here, particularly in the weeby circles of the internet, Loli means something entirely different, has nothing to do with Lolita, and has more to do with gross child exploitation fiction and images. Right. So that's why we don't like to say Goth Loli, just because it, brings up negative connotations that has nothing to do with it. So just it's better not to go there.
Right. Actually, I don't. Anime has come up twice. I don't think I had a question about anime, but what is there like any connection between Gothic Lolita and anime other than just they show up in anime a lot? Like
that's pretty much it. Like it's like some anime seem to have like Gothic Lolita inspired characters, and there's been a small handful of anime manga that have like revolved around Gothic Lolita, but not really any connection other than that.
I just played, I don't remember the name of it, but I downloaded some Japanese mobile game. And when you were making your character, they had 3 genders, and the genders were male, female, and Lolita, which I thought was hilarious that they just had to.
I want that on my birth certificate.
All right, cool. So, and then relating to terminology, and feel free to, if there are any other, specific terms that may come up in the subculture, throw those in there. But I've also come across EGL and EGA, and I think that's a fashion thing, but I'm not entirely sure how that relates to Gothic Lolita.
Yeah, so EGL means Elegant Gothic Lolita, and that was a term that Mana actually used to describe the feeling that he wanted to evoke with his brand, Wame Moche. So it was just this really like cheesy, flowery poem that he wrote about it, but it was supposed to embody both like cute innocence, but also be like dark and unsettling. And so that just refers to like a Gothic Lolita style that is still really cute, but more elegant rather than like aggressively fluffy and cute, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then EGA is Elegant Gothic Aristocrat, which is sort of like a companion style to Lolita. So it's not cute at all. Like it's definitely more androgynous. It's flowy, long silhouettes. So think like how like a sexy Victorian vampire would dress, like, long coats, long floor-length skirts, jabots, and puffy, like the Seinfeld puffy poet shirt, like that kind of stuff. So that's the difference between the two.
Loathe that episode because anytime I've worn any vaguely Victorian inspired top to work, someone has made that joke about the pirate shirt, and it's just, I'm so sick of hearing that. The last 33 years of my life,
I've come to embrace it.
Maybe I'll come around eventually. I don't know.
I've become inured to it. It doesn't really bother me at all.
Just accept your fate.
Yeah, I suppose. All right, so where I'm lost now. Okay. Yeah, cool. So I wanted to ask about how you see Gothic Lolita impacting goth, because I don't see it happen as much anymore, but I have seen various publications, even insiders like other goths, talk about goth I don't know, subgroups, and they always throw Gothic Lolita in there, and I feel like that's totally inaccurate, but I do feel like Gothic Lolita has had a influence on goth. So can you kind of talk about how you see that crossover working?
Yeah, I feel like I noticed the same thing. Like it crops up every once in a while where people are talking about it as like a subset of goth, but it's not really a subset. It's more like a cousin because it borrows from goth for sure, mostly from the aesthetics and obsession with vampires and spooky stuff, graveyards, etc. But it doesn't really have anything to do with the goth subculture outside of that, even though a lot of Gothic Lolitas are goth themselves. So I feel like it just comes up when someone needs to like write a filler blog article, and it's like, well, how many types of goth are there? Look at this wacky Japanese goth. Yeah. Like it, I don't think it's really that influential now, but maybe kind of in the earlier 2000s. Like I remember around 2005, there was like this kind of cutesy goth trend that popped up. I don't know if you guys remember that, but it was like take regular goth stuff and make it like kind of frilly and cutesy. Like even on TV, we had like these bubbly goth characters wearing like not Lolita stuff, but like frilly and cutesy and bubbly stuff. I think that was the only real kind of influence it had. I don't think it's super relevant.
There was a lot of crossover around the late 90s and into the 2000s, I think. In the 90s, it was considered perky goth was the subtype. that was the goth involving, the bows and, like Batsmaru and other cute Asian influence, a lot of Asian influence stuff, because Asian is oftentimes, or a lot of our fascination in the West with Japanese culture and Japanese ideas tends to focus on the cutesy Hello Kitty style stuff. So of course they had the Batsmaru as the goth Hello Kitty character. So that was there. And then Hot Topic jumped on it as well with the, what were the cute dolls that were there for a while? Late 90s. I don't know what they were called, but there was a cute line of dolls.
Oh, like Living Dead dolls,
like dark and cute, kind of, but they predated that, and they were more cutesy than.
Okay.
Well,
yeah.
I think they were definitely related, but there was a lot of that influenced through the Hot Topic.
Teddy scares. Remember Teddy scares? I think I got Sarah one for one of our anniversaries a while ago, but
yeah. And then bands like Switchblade Symphony also. Picked up that fashion and sort of the cutesy bubblegum, but dark and sinister at the same time. So I definitely have seen that, like you said, through the late 90s into the early 2000s. It did sort of correspond with the rise of visibility and popularity of generally the Japanese tribes, the various, the little youth groups that would hang around in the various styles, Gothic Lolita being one of them. Those became more visible in the West, and also the rise of anime culture. So there definitely was some interaction and feedback there. So I do think there was some inspiration in Gothic style and Gothic fashion from this sort of dark, cutesy aesthetic that gelled with a lot of people. But yeah, I haven't. Other than that, there hasn't been. It wasn't like there was a lot of cross-pollination. It was just a small influence in certain segments of the subculture.
Mm. I think, in my experience, well, I remember probably the mid 2000s being when I was made aware of Gothic Lolita. I think the first time was when I saw back when they actually had print publications. I know in Hot Topic they would sell these big glossy Japanese magazines. I think one of them was called Cure or something like that. I might have one somewhere actually. But these thick like tomes of a magazine, all in Japanese, but I remember actually seeing them at house parties. And there was a music festival I used to go to, there was a goth tent, and somebody would bring in stacks of magazines that they collected, different, because there were, I don't know, 5 or 6 different print magazines that were dark and spooky or specifically goth, and that was always one of them. And people would just look through it for fashion inspiration and like makeup inspiration, see if there were any bands and stuff in there, because you couldn't read it. But I mean, that was kind of how people got a lot of their information anyway, was word of mouth and print publications, because even in 2003 to 2005, I don't think you really had the kind of proliferation of information out there. It was still, if you wanted to get information about goth, you still kind of had to know somebody or know where to look, because a lot of people, I think it was kind of a niche within goth of people that were on alt gothic and whatever, the net goths. I don't think that was everybody. So I remember that's where I saw a lot of Gothic Lolita, and I feel like maybe Emily Autumn and Jillian Venters kind of were the peak of seeing an inspiration taken from Gothic Lolita into goth fashion, which is interesting because that was way before like pastel goth and new goth. So you had this whole different set of sartorial idioms where, cyber goth, romantic, actually probably similar to steampunk, because I don't know the history of steampunk, but I feel like that also had a similar rise in popularity, where in the early and mid 2000s, where it was kind of its own thing, and then goths, as it gained popularity on its own, goths just kind of took some aesthetic inspiration, and you saw those idioms start to creep into what people would wear to clubs and that kind of thing. And so I think I actually wonder now that, because right now, the last couple of years, we haven't really had any new fashion styles for goth. So I wonder if we're going to see stuff like Gothic Lolita come back into vogue, or if there's going to be something totally new, because there is kind of a 90s nostalgia thing going on right now. So I wonder, I don't know what both of you think about that, if you feel like that's going to come back into goth vogue at some point. But
I mean, to be fair, a lot of the quote unquote new styles that have at least tried to come into goth have been kind of shouted down on the internet, with the whole rise of Instagoths and all that, and neo-goth and cholo goth and health goth and those things that are tangential but usually just get denigrated and shit on. So that could be part of it, is that there's a degree of essentialism that's happening, where people are being very protective of the Gothic style, for better or for worse, and that's keeping the style from branching out so wildly.
I wonder though, because I do use TikTok, and there's a whole I don't know if I would say generation, but there's a whole group of people getting into goth in 17 to 20-ish range, and they seem to have a not very different, but a slightly different set of values than people who are older. So I do wonder if that's ever gonna make a comeback. I don't know, Chelsea, do you have any thoughts about that?
I don't know. I feel like you're kind of right. Like there's sort of going to be a clash between the old guard who want to keep everything the same, and then like the TikTok kids who are all e-boys and e-girls. I feel like I sound like a 90-year-old right now. But I mean, it's normal for styles to evolve over time, and it's okay. I think we should just kind of embrace it, because I never really thought that there was anything inherently wrong with new goth or pastel goth or any of those things, because it's just clothes. I mean, they weren't necessarily goth, but the styles themselves weren't bad. And then seeing people essentially drag them for dressing a certain way without necessarily even knowing if they cared about goth culture was kind of upsetting. Like it's literally just clothes. Let people wear what they want.
Well, even in a sort of from an event perspective, I liked how, as much as I would want to, so going back, as much as I would want to say cyber goth isn't goth, but it was nice how when you would go out, there would always be at least that one person dressed as a cyber goth, that one person wearing like gothic fairy clothing. There's a few people that were Gothic Lolita and that kind of thing. And I don't see that diversity as much anymore, if I can remember back to 6 months ago when you could actually go see people. So it was nice to, even if I don't know how you feel, Chelsea, about whether you would prefer that Gothic Lolita wouldn't be conflated with goth anymore. And actually, because you mentioned that Gothic Lolitas tend to be goth, I wonder if that's more of a North American thing in general, just because the styles are similar. But I don't know if you would prefer that Gothic Lolita just kind of stayed its own thing. And
I think they should stay separate, because they have some overlap, but they're totally separate cultures from different worlds, and I don't think that they mesh super well necessarily. And yeah, I think you're also right that a lot of Gothic Lolitas in North America and Europe, they were like goth beforehand, and that's what made them interested in Gothic Lolita. Whereas I'm not super sure about Japanese Lolitas, but generally they like Gothic Lolita because of how it looks, and not necessarily because they're into the goth scene.
Right. So. Okay. So let me ask you this then. Sorry, and Trey, unless you wanted to say anything else about that.
No,
okay.
I'm good.
I wanted to ask about Lolita being used, and now this could just be my ignorance, but from my perspective, it seems like it gets used as cosplay sometimes, whereas like goth fashion, for example, that doesn't, seem to happen too much, and goths themselves are pretty explicit about the fashion not being a costume kind of thing. But then again, goth, at least now, isn't really as popular in pop culture as something like anime is. So I wonder if, does Gothic Lolita get used as cosplay, and is that upsetting for Gothic Lolitas, or do they have a different take on that?
No, it's pretty similar. It's kind of like when it's on Halloween and everyone in your office is like wearing black lipstick and they're like, "Hey, Chelsea, I'm dressed as you." And I'm supposed to think it's funny. So it's kind of the same
Yeah.
thing. Like Gothic Lolitas and Lolitas in general really do not like people who treat it as a costume or as a cosplay, especially because a lot of the time when it's worn in a cosplay style, it's worn kind of badly or incorrectly. And it's just like, way to make us look terrible. Thanks.
Mhm. I assume it's even less of a silver lining, whereas, for example, on this podcast, Trey and I have both expressed that uh, we don't mind too much when goth is used as inspiration for broader communities, because it means that it's easier to find black clothing and modify it and that kind of thing. But I feel like that doesn't translate over to Gothic Lolita.
Yeah, it doesn't really work that way. Like for me, I personally think it's really cool when goth and dark stuff becomes trendy because I'm like, all right, so I can raid the thrift store and I know I'm going to find some cool stuff. But
Yeah.
for Lolita fashion, it's kind of exclusive, and it's not so much that people want to like gatekeep it and keep it out of people's hands. It's just that it seems that whenever people from outside the Lolita community try to make their way in or make something that appeals to us, it comes off as super ham-fisted. And
Right.
it just usually, it's just like, oh God, why did you even try?
I feel like the 40 Years of Goth video fits into that. I think she took a bunch of heat from Gothic Lolitas when that came out. I don't know, 5 years ago or whatever it was.
Oh yeah. Well, she caught heat from everyone, honestly.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
But yeah, like the whole Victorian doll with the painted lips and the mini hat thing, like I could hear the collective screams of agony from around the planet.
So
I think one
go ahead.
interesting counterpoint on the cosplay versus goth Lolita thing, though, is I think that's again another. I guess the tension between the two is probably a little bit more of a Western thing as well, because cosplay in itself is a very serious subculture in the Japanese culture. The main difference, even though they might have some superficial similarities, because there are some cosplayed characters who are also Gothic Lolita, is the idea that Gothic Lolita, you're being yourself to some degree. You're being maybe a fantasy version of yourself or a more elaborate version of yourself, but you're still being yourself. Whereas cosplay is explicitly about being another character, putting on another persona, whether it's an anime character or just some other pop culture character. So there is that underlying sense of why one does cosplay and how one embodies a cosplay aesthetic versus how one would embody a Gothic Lolita or Lolita in general aesthetic. So I think that I don't think there's as much of a tension between the Gothic Lolita and cosplay communities, because cosplay isn't denigrated over there as much as it seems to be over here as kind of a superficial aesthetic. But I mean, that's still kind of an outsider's perspective. But what I've sort of gleaned from what I've seen in those communities as portrayed in Japan itself.
That's a really important distinction. Like, I'm not super familiar with cosplay community at all, so I mean that makes sense to me.
All right. Well, I think I was going to ask about music, but let me come back to that and just kind of stick on the fashion bit here, because I mean, it's interesting to me, assuming that, and I think you've said this in videos that, and actually in this interview, but that Gothic Lolita is basically based in fashion, and I don't personally have lived experience in a community that's based around fashion primarily. So from the goth perspective, I know people get really defensive around the question of what is and isn't goth, and how specific you get and how broad you get. And actually, I just this week I realized I wasn't getting YouTube notifications for all the comments, so I went back through the last 7 months of videos and read all the comments on YouTube for the podcast. And there's some pretty heated flame wars buried in there about, how dare you say goth is only about how you feel inside, or how dare you be an elitist and say it's only about music, etc. But that does make me wonder, for Gothic Lolita, how kind of, I don't know, maybe not gatekeeper-esque, but how strict the expectations around the style is, and if there are those internal debates about what is and is not considered Gothic Lolita.
Definitely. It's pretty similar in that there's a lot of people who, like with goth, might not know a whole lot about the subculture, but they decide that, Lolita fashion is how I feel inside. And then Lolitas who actually wear Lolita are like, actually, no, it's not about that at all. And then they get real mad and they're like, stop gatekeeping. You're hurting my feelings. You're a bunch of meanie bullies. Right. And it's the exact same thing where it's like, it's a fashion with kind of strictly defined rules. They're not super strict, but you have to follow them in general. Otherwise, it doesn't look like Lolita fashion anymore. And that's really the main baseline requirement. It's a pretty easy subculture to get into. It's like, do you have a full Lolita outfit? Congratulations, you're a Lolita. You don't really have to do anything other than that. So when people push back against that very minimal rule set, they tend to catch a lot of heat.
You don't have to have a locket with a photo of Mana around your neck or anything, right? Okay.
No, that's for the cult.
Okay.
I think another thing that helps it be a little bit more broadly and maybe more accepting is the fact that it's part of the broader Lolita subculture umbrella, which has a lot of diversity inside it as well. So,
can you talk about that?
Sure.
You or Chelsea, just because I skipped over the fact that Gothic Lolita, there's other types of Lolita.
There's a lot of them.
So if we can explain and clarify some of that, that would be a good idea, I think.
Do you want to go on that, Chelsea? I think you have more expertise than I do, though I have.
Sure.
I've paid attention to a fair amount of Lolita stuff in a while.
Yeah, sure. I can give you the rundown. So there's 3 main substyles. So Gothic, which we've already talked about. There's also Sweet, which is the one that I think most people outside of Japan would recognize as being Lolita fashion, just because it's like so eye-catching. Like, so it's ones with all the pastel pink and big fluffy hair and cakes and cute animals and everything printed on your dress. Huge puffy skirt. So that's kind of, Sweet is like the most cutesy form of Lolita fashion.
Bows.
Yeah, it's like aggressively sugary sweet. And then there's Classic, which is a little bit more like Victorian and vintage styled, and it's actually a little bit easier to tone down for everyday wear because it's like a lot more mature, muted colors, jewel tones, like floral prints, wearing cute little berets and Oxfords like you're going to university in, I don't know, 1902 or something like that. So that's some people kind of jokingly say that classic Lolitas all want to look like a floral grandma couch, and they're not wrong. So, and I'm not saying that derisively because I like both Sweet and classic Lolita. So, but that's pretty much the main 3 substyles. And then within those substyles, you can play around with all sorts of different themes and motifs. Like you can make a pirate themed outfit, you can make a witch themed outfit, etc.
Yeah, that's a lot of it is just, and that's why it's easier. So people can feel Lolita, and maybe they might want to be Gothic Lolita, but they can't quite pull it off. But they could still be considered part of the greater Lolita umbrella. So that's why it's maybe a little bit more welcoming as a subculture, because there is that wider variety of accepted substyles within the broader Lolita term. That's just generally designed around that Victorian, youthful / childhood fashion style.
Yeah, it's pretty broad. So, I mean, if you don't like one particular thing, like if you hate pink, then you can wear plenty of things that are not pink and still be wearing Lolita.
So it doesn't have to be, so you can have a Victorian inspired Lolita outfit that's not Gothic Lolita. Is it just that it's not black? Is that...
It's a little more fussy than that, but it's pretty much like the substyle is more about the whole feeling of the outfit, like the entire vibe, rather than just like the color. So you could have a sweet Lolita dress that's all black, but because of the way that it's styled, like you could be carrying a cute stuffed animal and you can have bunnies printed on your skirt, and that doesn't really come across as goth. And
Right.
likewise, you could wear a gothic outfit that is all white, but you're wearing like stripper shoes and fishnets and you've got crosses hanging off of your neck, and that's not very
Right.
cutesy. So
Right.
it's more about like the whole feeling of your outfit.
Okay.
Yeah, there is also a specific sub-style of Kuro Lolita, which is simply black Lolita, which is not gothic, but it is monochrome.
Yeah, and you can do that
But
in any sub-style.
So what's the? I didn't ask this either. What's the difference then? I feel like I sound so dumb asking these questions, but where's the the differentiation between Lolita and Visual K then? Because those are also separate things, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Visual K is. I feel like Visual K is more of a real subculture than Lolita is. Like Lolita's actually still a subculture, but Visual K was more of a musical movement. I say movement rather than a style, because it wasn't really limited to a genre. It was more like a bunch of musicians that had a similar theme and aesthetic that all came around in the same time period, like through the 80s and 90s. And they all tended to be kind of influenced by glam rock and punk and industrial in some way, but they weren't limited to necessarily like those genres. And some of them wore Lolita fashion. Some of them wore like David Bowie style clothing. Some of them had 2-foot tall mohawks. So the fashion wasn't really like supposed to be any specific thing. It was just supposed to be really eye catching and outrageous. So they dressed like whatever. They dressed as crazy as possible, essentially. And then there's a lot of Visual K bands that have Lolita fans for sure, but they're not necessarily related anymore. Like that, I feel like that's kind of an old school thing. New Lolitas don't care about Visual K whatsoever.
Okay.
Yeah, in general, Visual K is more the focus on that is flamboyance in general and extravagance, and then the musical style is, like Chelsea said, very glam influenced and has a similar diversity of looks and appearance that glam did as well, playing with gender roles, playing with ideas, but very visually stunning. Hence the name. It's all about the visual impact of the performances, in addition to the music and style of the band and demeanor. Where Gothic Lolita is not necessarily quite about the extravagance and flamboyance, so it's not averse to it, but you definitely do have the crossovers. The main crossovers, of course, Mana and Malice Miser being the Visual K band that was also very strongly Gothic Lolita in their specific aesthetic. There are a few other bands that definitely pick on Baroque, Rococo, Renaissance, Victorian style fashions that do that, but then there are others that totally go off script and do other things with lame and suits and jumpsuits and things like that. So it's much more broad.
Yeah, to what you were saying, Chelsea, I feel like I've seen people in Visual K wearing straight up like colorful punk bondage pants, basically, that are just literally bondage pants kind of thing. So that's, yeah. I don't know. In goth fashion, there are, well, I mean, there's obviously the sort of high-end boutique designers for really expensive goth clothing stuff, especially if you want to commission something or something like that. But in general, I feel like goth fashion is built around the idea that anyone can have access to it and you can get that aesthetic on a budget. What's the accessibility of Gothic Lolita fashion? I feel like based on how elaborate it is, there's a pretty high bar to entry as far as money's concerned.
Yeah, there is. Like, I'd say that it's more accessible than it used to be because cost of manufacturing certain items has gone down, of course, over the past couple of years. And it used to be really hard and really expensive to get, the authentic Lolita stuff imported in from Japan. So if you weren't willing to shell out hundreds of dollars, then chances are you were kind of hand making things, or you were trying to like take something you already had and sort of, I don't know, finagle it with a little bit and try to make it work. But
So
That was tricky.
Can you get away with DIYing stuff? Because I feel like it has to be so clean and well put together that you'd have to have some training in like sewing and construction and that kind of stuff if you wanted to.
Yeah, like there are definitely people who hand make their own stuff, but everyone I know who does good handmade is already like they're like a professional level seamstress or a very
Right,
good
okay.
hobbyist. But
Yeah.
otherwise, DIY is kind of out for the majority of people because it's going to look amateur, and you can't really look amateur without everyone knowing that you look
Mhm.
not so great. But there's some more affordable brands that have popped up over the past 10 years or so, mostly from China, where labor production is much cheaper. So people can purchase from those brands, which are like cheaper by like 50 to 75%. So that makes it a lot more accessible. But it's still hard. Like
Mhm.
if you're like for me, for instance, when I got into Goth, I was 12. I had no money. So
Right.
I was using puffy paint on t-shirts, and you can't do that as a high school kid with Lolita fashion, so it's a little tricky.
So the community itself probably skews towards older then in general, not as much getting into it as a kid.
Now it does, but originally the I guess back in like 2004 or 2005, the whole Lolita community, English speaking anyway,
Mhm.
was centered on this one live journal community. And at the time, I thought that these people were so old and so mature, but when I went back and read some old posts recently, I was like, oh shit, they're in high school.
Right, yeah.
But
That's
now,
weird how that
like,
happens.
we've all grown up. So now all of us are like
Yeah.
30 and we have somewhat more money. So it's a little easier. It's something that a lot of people get interested in when they're kids or teens, and then they don't have the means to do it until they're in their 20s. That's a pretty common story.
There's also a lot of emphasis in thrifting within the community too, but it's a little bit harder to do the thrift DIY and have it look good. You have to be more discerning, I think, than where goth thrifting with the DIY. You can get, something with even just the vague right shape and or color palette and dye, cut, tear, rip, sew, button, pin, etc., to make something that's appreciated within the subculture. Whereas with something like Gothic Lolita or Lolita in general, you need to find pieces that are vintage and already work in the style for the most part, and maybe you could get away with dyeing, or if you're really good at, making clothes, you could potentially alter it. But for the most part, you have to find pieces that already are mostly there.
Yeah, thrifting's not super practical, but I guess how a lot of people who don't necessarily have a ton of money start out is just we sell everything to each other secondhand. So, like,
Mm.
I hardly ever buy anything new because why would I pay for something new when I don't have to?
It's nice to hear you say that because that is one of the most for me valued characteristics about goth culture are the people who have been in it for longer and kind of accumulated stuff over a long period of time, than kind of giving that stuff out or selling it for cheap to other people in the community because they want to have others be able to participate and experience and express themselves. So it's nice to hear that I'm sure there's, every community has its own special hell for drama and that kind of thing. But it's nice to hear there's some sort of camaraderie as well.
Definitely.
What I wanted to ask about, I know we brought up mana, mana. Okay. But when it relates to, and obviously he has a very female presenting look. So when it relates to male identifying people, there doesn't seem to be like I don't know, masculine counterpoint to Gothic Lolita. But is it in the community? Are people who identify as men, are they able to also be Gothic Lolitas and wear the same kind of thing? Or is that like is that weird?
Not really. There's a lot of men or male identified or male bodied people who wear Lolita fashion too. Like women
Hmm.
are by far the majority, but there are definitely some guys around and they'll do the exact same kind of outfits with the dresses and heels and everything. And nobody's really bothered as long as they're not being weird about being in a room full of 99% girls.
Mhm.
But there actually is a few male counterpart kind of fashions to Lolita. So there's
Oh,
what's called OG fashion, which is very similar, except instead of
how do you spell that? Sorry.
it's spelled Ouji,
Okay, I figured it would be something like that. Okay,
and it means prince. And it's really cute. It's basically like
that is cute.
instead of wearing a puffy dress, you're wearing like pants or shorts, and you're still doing the kind of fancy blouses and socks and everything like that, but it's just kind of more boyish or androgynous than
Mhm.
Lolita. So I find that a lot of people who might be uncomfortable being overtly feminine find OG a little bit less threatening because it's like you can be feminine without being too feminine. And then
Oh, and it looks
yeah.
like there's you can do that as well. Just it seems like that's gender doesn't really matter either because if identify as a woman, you can also wear OG fashion as well. From what I'm seeing here, but
Yeah, exactly. Like most of the people I know who wear OG are women, but I know a few men who wear OG as
okay.
well. And then Aristocrat, the elegant Gothic aristocrat that I mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
that's also a very androgynous style. You'll see both men and women wearing aristocrat, but it's not that common anymore of a style. Like if I saw someone wearing it, I'd be like, "Whoa, did you just jump in here from a time capsule or what? Is it 2003?" But yeah.
Yeah, strangely enough, I think a lot of the Gothic Lolitas that I have known have been male, actually, and do just
Okay.
the standard Gothic Lolita appearance, same dresses and all that, the very androgynous but
I love
girlish
that.
look,
That's
and
fantastic.
I think that's great. I find the Lolita subculture in general is very open to ambiguous gender and or playing with other gender ideas and things like that. So
Well, yeah, let
it's good.
me, Chelsea, let me ask you about that because I did have a question about, whether or not Gothic Lolita, beyond just pure aesthetics, if as a culture, if there's any identifying of uh, the community being subversive or transgressive in some way. And maybe, I don't know, is gender, other than just being able to play with it, is that a thing where it's like, oh, this is a subversion of expectations for broader culture, or is there any kind of that stuff going on in the Gothic Lolita?
I think so. Like in the Lolita community as a whole, I wouldn't say it's like super deep and subversive and you could write whole papers on it, but I think it is there. Like I would say, for instance, okay, maybe not most, but a huge percentage of Lolitas are queer or
Oh, nice.
like non-binary or,
Hmm.
a sort of different gender identities or different sexualities. And that's totally acceptable. Like I always joke that all Lolitas are gay because we kind of are. But um, so there's definitely that. I also think that a lot of Lolitas tend to actually be fairly left leaning and like political, which is pretty cool to see.
Mm.
Um,
I feel like being queer and political really go hand in hand anyway. So,
Definitely, that's a fair point too. But I guess it's hard to say if we're really super subversive. I think
mhm.
the most subversive thing that you really can do in Lolita is that, well, for me, speaking as, a cis woman, is that when I'm wearing Lolita clothes, I'm dressing purely for my own enjoyment and not for the attention of men or for male gaze or to be appealing to others. It's purely
Mhm.
for me. And I don't think that's as socially acceptable or even something that a lot of people have a grasp on. Like some people might not understand why a woman might choose to dress pretty or wear makeup without specifically trying to attract attention. It's like, no, I'm just doing that because I like it. And there's nothing wrong with that.
I do think, and this definitely came out of feminism, but I do feel like that has become more generally accepted now that women can dress the way they want because it makes them feel empowered rather than dressing for men. And it's really sad to me that that's only, at least from my perspective, it seems to only have become more common recently. Uh, but yeah, I guess that's a good point that subculturally, that ideal is often built into what it means to be part of that community, that you are dressing as a extension of your, self identity rather than dressing for others. So that's interesting.
Yeah, that part is, from what I've read on the history of it and heard about from other people in the Gothic Lolita community, that aspect of being pretty, being cute, being, beautiful for yourself rather than for other people is one of the key points of that community, and one of its key points of, I guess, kicking against the greater culture where we still live in a world where women are expected to be attractive to attract a mate, a spouse, to step to that next stage in life where you get married and you have the kids and blah, 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 blah. So being able to do that for oneself is very much of a feminist ideal. And it was even more so, especially around the inception of Gothic Lolita in Japan, where the idea of a very strict adherence to a progression, a life progression, where you're this as a child, then you go through these years of school, and then you do this, and you get a job or you get a husband. So a lot of these styles, Lolita included, were a subversion of that aspect of it. Lolita kind of twofold, both for the beauty for its own sake rather than for nabbing a husband, as well as a sort of move back towards or hearkening back towards childhood as kicking against that pressure to conform into this adult world.
Well, kind of going along that same train of thought, let me ask you this, Chelsea. Is it the Gothic Lolita clothing, is that the type of thing where, similar to Goth, we would be trying to, or a lot of Goths would dress how they feel on a day-to-day basis and would prefer to normalize heterogeneous physical expressions, or is it more of a kind of only special occasion thing? Because I mean, Gothic Lolita, in my mind, is like, y'all are hardcore because it's like extreme. So I feel like that might put a damper on trying to do that a lot. But where is that aspect of self expression is, I want to do this all the time kind of thing?
I think it depends a lot on the person's own circumstances. I think in
Mm,
an ideal world, most Lolitas would love to be able to wear it every day, but
okay.
practically that doesn't play out. Like, for
Right.
me,
Yeah.
for instance, I work where I can wear it every day if I so chose to, but I don't want to wear Lolita every day on a commuter train. So,
Oh, yeah.
but some of my friends do wear Lolita every single day, and they don't have any clothing that's not Lolita appropriate. So it just depends entirely on that person's circumstances. But since most of us are working adults, it's not so much that we don't want to, it's just like you can't. So
I was gonna say it would probably be stressful wearing, because presumably being so expensive, you could only have a certain number of dresses. Uh, I feel like it would be stressful to wear something so expensive every day. But on the other hand, the romantic goth kind of Victorian clothing that I have that was very expensive is expensive for a reason, because it's very well made. So it's lasted like 15 years, and with a lot of wear. So maybe that's not an issue.
yeah, for sure. Like for me, my clothing, aside from the stuff that's white, it's really
Mm.
durable, so I
Ooh.
don't have concerns about damage or wear or anything like that. It's just more of a comfort and practicality thing, especially for me, because in my job position, I am patient facing, and patients ask me enough weird questions about being goth because I do wear regular goth clothes to work every day. So it's just like, I get enough questions and weird interactions already. I don't need to add to it, and I don't need patients to find a reason to distrust me or think, weird things about me. So it's just easier to avoid. But it's not because I'm scared of ruining the clothes.
Yeah, I don't think I could ever wear something that's white that's more than like $20, because I would find a way to get it dirty. Um, okay, so let's maybe we can wrap up talking about music a little bit. And then if there's anything we missed in this conversation, feel free to bring it up. But I did want to ask about and actually you can tell me how to pronounce this correctly, but I really, the primary band, maybe other than what is is Blood a band? Is that a band?
Yes.
Yeah, that's that one and Moi du Moi. I don't know how to actually say that. Is
Moi
that
dis
correct?
moi.
Moi dis moi. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the only two bands I know personally. So I wanted to ask if you can share. I know it's not like a music subculture, but either bands similar to that use that style, and then maybe even Japanese bands, Japanese goth bands, because that has always been this weird omission in talking about goth for some reason. I don't know why Japan specifically has been the most obscure sort of goth community in global goth, but yeah, any bands that we could look up or music we can check out would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like the reason that people don't really touch on Japanese goth bands is because there's such a huge language barrier. Like the Japanese internet is totally separate from ours at this point, so most people
Right,
just
okay.
don't know that what's happening, and if they did, they can't read any of the content. So that makes it really hard to access. But for bands that are similar to like Moi dis Moi and Blood, um there's quite a few visual K bands that have that sort of Baroque rock inspired sound and the whole vampire-y, flamboyant aesthetic going on.
Yeah.
So, I guess there's a couple that I can think of that I really like. I tend to like more obscure visual K bands, but there's one that I like called Death Grail from the late 90s. And they have the most ridiculous 10-foot hair and,
Perfect.
like leather trench coats to the floor because you have to. That's just how you roll.
Right.
So there's bands like that. There's Velvet Eden, which is sort of a dark wave inspired visual K band. There's JP Kism, which was like, I forget, was it? No, GP Kism. I'm not even sure I'm saying that properly because half these bands have like these incomprehensible names that are just letters. They were kind of like an industrial outfit that was like, their look was super fetish goth, but the sound was like industrial EBM. There's a modern band called Hollow Mellow, and they wear Gothic Lolita and OG fashion in all of their music videos, which is great, and has a female lead singer, which I'm always down for. Trying to think of a couple off the top of my head. It's kind of tricky.
I mean, there is Malice Miser, if we want to go
Of
back
course.
to Mana's original rather than his follow-up band, but that was just very nascent as far as Gothic Lolita and really more Lolita and or just Mana's personal style.
Yeah,
I
they're
think there's a
definitely
band
the
called
big one.
Versailles as well. That's
Yeah,
a little
they're
bit more
kind of a
Baroque style.
power metal too.
Yeah. A lot of the bands are more. It's sometimes hard to find the bands that have both the sound and the aesthetic. Like Deer and Grey would be closer to some of the goth industrial or sound, but the aesthetic is not Lolita at all.
Yeah, for sure.
I do love a good power metal band.
Then you'll love Versailles. I think they're one of the best and most popular power metal bands from Japan. Like,
oh, cool.
They just have fantastic costume design. They're really good guitarists. Vocals are an acquired taste, but I personally like them. They're great live too.
I don't think I've liked the vocals from any power metal bands. They're more about the
That's
instrumentalists.
Valid. Yeah, totally valid.
I like I don't know if you could classify them as power metal, but no, great. Now I've forgotten the name of the band. Just specifically on vocals. God damn it! I'm gonna have to look. The band that has a whole album about the Silmarillion.
So like every power metal band, right?
I was going to say there's probably half a dozen power metal bands that have at least heavily Tolkien-inspired albums.
Yeah, power metal's for nerds. I'm including myself in that, so.
Yeah. Oh, Blind Guardian. Yeah.
I was thinking Blind Guardian, but I wasn't going to say it because I'm like, it's not Blind
his
Guardian,
voice.
right? Okay, that's valid.
Yeah.
He's got great voice.
The big obvious band that everybody knows. Of course, that's the one I can't remember the name of. Cool. So let's see. Well, was there anything before we move on to the album review? Anything around this topic of Gothic Lolita that should be talked about or mentioned or explored? Or are we all good?
I mean, one thing I'd like to to get a little bit more insight on. We kind of touched on it earlier when we were talking about the comparison between goth as more of a holistic subculture with club culture and concerts and bands and things like that, and then Gothic Lolita as more of a fashion culture. But I know there is a heavy social aspect of Gothic Lolita as well. What, in your experience, Chelsea, or what have you done as far as types of events, types of social things that you see in the Gothic Lolita community that pulls the community together?
Well, socially, we have a lot of online groups where we can talk to other Lolitas, whether they're local or international. So that's kind of where, in the early days, a lot of our information was kind of pooled together. So people would share photos of their clothing, they would share their magazines, they would share just info. And online is still a huge aspect of it. Like, I have a ton of friends who I've met who are from overseas, and we only met through like these Lolita groups on LiveJournal, which then moved to like Tumblr and Facebook and those kind of things. So that's definitely a big part of it. And then locally, most big cities have their own Lolita community groups, and we'll just kind of meet up and do normal stuff that people meet up to do. So, go to karaoke, go bowling, go to the museum. And it's been, for me personally, it's been awesome because Lolita came into my life when my entire social group collapsed. So I basically found myself an entire new group of friends who all liked the exact same things I did. So it was kind of cool having a whole bunch of clones to hang out with. And then sometimes we'll have more fancy events like tea parties, and we'll invite special guests. So sometimes we'll invite a guest from like a Japanese Lolita brand, and they'll talk to us, or they'll have special sales for us and that kind of stuff. So there's a pretty big social aspect to it, but you don't have to participate in that if you don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody invites me to tea parties. Oh wait, no, we've been to one.
Yeah, no, we did a tea party with,
yeah, in the forest.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds
I think
awesome.
that's the only tea party I've ever been to.
It was fun. I'd love to see that organized again.
It was beautiful. Again. Yeah, that was. It was a lot of work dragging all that stuff into the forest, but it was fun while we were there.
Yeah.
Well, actually, going off of that question, what's the sort of because you mentioned online community, and the first thing my brain thought of was, I wonder if that's because Gothic Lolita is so niche, so you don't have a big community. But sticking on the event thing, what's the kind of, ratio of Gothic Lolitas to Lolitas at those events?
So it varies a lot depending on your locale and the time period you're looking at. So currently, there's a bit of a Gothic Lolita revival. It was kind of the underdog of all the substyles for the past few years, but recently it's kind of come back into popularity. So you're seeing more. But in my local community, it's like, let's see, we've got probably 500 members total, maybe 100 actual regulars, and about 10 of us are goths.
So it's more of a, it's less like I'm a Gothic Lolita and more I'm a Lolita, meaning that people who are Lolitas will wear a variety of outfits, or do people more tend to stick to one thing?
A lot of people do like to vary their outfits, or they have kind of multiple styles in their wardrobe, but I find that goths tend to be goths primarily, whereas in the other substyles, they might be more willing to switch between different styles. But goths tend to be kind of purists. At least for my circle of goths, we kind of are purists.
As we should be.
Exactly, because we don't want to be touched by the other filthy, inferior lifestyles.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you dabble in some of the other close ones like the punk Lolitas or the pirate Lolitas, the Kuro Lolita, those that are close enough to still fit within the goth aesthetic, but yeah, definitely not as much as, a sweet Lolita who might dabble in classic or dabble in, some of the other styles a little bit more widely.
Mm-hmm.
It's also expensive because a lot of your pieces won't work between if you have 3 separate wardrobes, like there's not a whole lot of crossover between them. So you have to buy 3 whole separate sets of clothing, and that's too rich for my blood.
Do I hear a kitty?
You do hear a kitty.
Oh,
whose kitty is that?
That's mine.
Yours, Stray?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. At first I thought there was a baby crying.
Yeah, I thought I was hearing things there.
Yeah. I was like, wait, no, he's 7. It's not. Oh,
yes, you're famous, Samira. You're on the radio.
Cool. So was there anything else? I don't know. Advice. I'm just off the top of my head here. Advice for people that want to get into Gothic Lolita, or anything else that we need to cover before we move on?
For advice, I would honestly say just jump in. Like, I see so many posts from newbies on the Lolita communities, and they're like, I'm scared. People are going to be mean to me because of my outfit. And I'm like, yeah, no shit. You look crazy. Just wear it. Like, just do it. Because no matter what kind of subcultural clothing you're going to wear, like, the normies, for lack of a better word, are going to think you're nuts. So just do it.
What are, go ahead.
I was going to say, what about like starter gear? You know, what kind of pieces would be best to start with and to get the look going, so you can build on it with layering and whatnot? But what's sort of the linchpin that you should start with if you're just getting into it?
So the most important thing to have would be at least 2 blouses, 1 black one and 1 white one, and 2 pairs of socks, a black one and a white one, and 1 solid colored dress. And that way you have 2 outfits right off the bat without having to spend a whole ton of money.
So other than your channel, which has a ton of fantastic information on it, you mentioned communities. If people are looking to connect with other Lolitas, what's like a place you would recommend? Because the internet is a shit show, so it's hard to know.
Oh, don't worry. Like, the Lolita internet's a total shit show too.
Okay.
But so I think recommend is a strong word.
Okay.
The ones that I'll just say they exist. You can go on places like Ruffle Chat is a good place to start. I'm using the term good loosely here.
Sure, yeah.
But it's the biggest community, so that's where most of us congregate. You'll get lots of good information, and usually when bad information is out there, they will immediately get shouted down. So the Ruffle Chat is a good place to start. There's also plenty of ridiculous drama on Ruffle Chat if that's kind of more your angle. And then I would also say there's Big Sisters of Lolita Fashion, which is where you can find some Lolita who's more experienced than you, and she'll teach you the ways of how to dress yourself, which I don't necessarily think is super needed, but some people do. Some people like having that helping hand, and you can go there. But some of the people who are like offering advice are the kind of people who shouldn't be offering advice. Kind of like when like you first start a hobby and you're like, I know everything, and now I'm going to teach everybody. But you just started.
That never happens in Goth. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, like remember when I was saying that I would go on the Neopets boards and yell at people about Susie Sue and Amy Lee. Yeah. So there's that.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Album review.
Trey, I don't know if you did some Google foo, but I couldn't really find any information about this band Hada other than that they're an experimental music project from Athens, Greece. It doesn't look like any of their profiles had any information beyond that. So
yeah, I didn't really look too much either. I just went and listened to the album and kind of read what was on the Bandcamp page, which is, of course, a label page rather than a band page. So was limited as far as information.
Yeah, and that's the label is Swiss Dark Nights, which if anyone hasn't checked out their releases, I recommend it because there's a lot of good albums on that label, on that Bandcamp page. But cool. So then let's get it. So the album is titled Abrahadabra, which is adorable. And we're going to play a track from that. And I didn't pick one, so let me see here.
I mean, my favorite was track 1, but it was not necessarily a good example of what the album was.
That's not really representative. Yeah. Let's go with because my favorite track also wasn't really.
I'd say
let's
two
just go
or
with the
four
second
would
track.
probably
Yeah,
be
let's go with
representative.
Let's go with Moonstone. So, I guess I'll share my thoughts first, unless anyone really wants to go first.
Go for it.
Because Trey, you tend to show me up, so I'll just share my dumb idiot thoughts before you talk about cool people stuff. So I liked listening to this album, and I liked doing this for an album review because we've done a lot of guitar-driven goth music in the last year, and personally, I'm a huge fan of bands like Dine Lachayan and Helium Vola, Cocteau Twins. Maybe this might be closer to something like Devil in the Universe, which I also really like. But the kind of atmospheric dark music. So that's really a treat, I think, to be able to get some time, make some time to listen to this. Before I talk about the music, or the sound, though, I want to point out that one of the strengths of this album is the lyrics. And if you go to the Bandcamp page, it has this very helpful lyric button, so you can pop out and read those, which I love when bands do that. And they usually tend to do that when they have strong lyrics. And actually, I pulled an example from Butterfly that I thought was really nice. Just one of the verses goes, "If I was your daughter, I'd bring you milk and some salt. If I were the sea, I'd bring you back your lovely ones. But I'm a mermaid of the sky, and I choose clouds to stay alive. I hold my breath till I see you again." So it's that very kind of dreamlike quality to the lyrics that I think are very well crafted, and I loved reading through as I was listening. Now, I wouldn't call this a goth album, but I do think it fits into the goth adjacent stuff. I guess probably, similar to the bands that I listed, right? You might see them play at a festival or get a track spun at a goth night, that kind of thing. And I like these bands a lot because you get a diversity of sound that you don't normally get in straight up goth music. Maybe similar to, well, it's not really world music like Dead Can Dance, but you've got like one of the early tracks, you've got a wood block in there. I think actually that might have been Moonstone, the one we played, but you get those kind of more the instruments that you don't hear very often. And then you do get some stuff that you could slot more into kind of post-punk sound. You get little hints of that going in and out of the tracks here and there. What did I put? Oh, Shadow of Love. Or no. What is this song? Is that the whole title? Shadow of Love Walks Alone
at night.
Yeah.
But yes.
Shadow of Love Walks Alone at Night. That had a kind of it used guitars with reverb that was similar to the kind of Drab Majesty sound that a lot of people like. And then you have track the song that was titled 56. It sounded like there was something that was kind of like a harp or something like that. So you get those more delicate fantasy sounds that you don't get in goth tracks. My favorite track was Little Lilies. And I'm bad at like dissecting and explaining music, but there was something about the sound to that song that every time I've listened to it, it just transports my mind into another world. I don't know. I'm not even exaggerating, but when I listen to that song, I get these tingles, like physical tingles in my body. Like I feel like my soul is lifting out of my skin or something like that. And I can't really verbalize it, but there's something about the sound is both really nostalgic for some strange reason and really intimate and personal. And so I it's strange, but I have a physical reaction to that song, which was fantastic. I loved it. I've listened to that song a bunch. So for me, I guess that's basically all I have to say about the album overall. I think it's flexible in the album, but it's also flexible in where I can see myself listening to it if I'm taking a drive and get something out of it that way. I can listen to it in the background if I'm working. But I could also see myself putting it on for doing a full moon ritual and get something completely different out of it in all three of those different scenarios, which I think kind of speaks to the depth that's in the album. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I don't know if I maybe 4.5 out of 5 if I had to, but I thought this was a fantastic album. So who wants to go next? Chelsea, do you want to share your
Sure.
thoughts?
I don't think my commentary is nearly as complex. I'm also really bad about like articulating why I like music, but I really liked this whole album as well. Like it felt kind of comfortable and nostalgic. Like I would describe how it made me feel as like a very warm hug, you know?
Yeah, it feels
It just felt
safe,
comfy.
right?
Yeah.
It's nice. Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know how else to describe it other than comfy. I guess it's because it's like not exactly treading new ground. Like we've heard sounds like this before from other bands, but they do it well and it's beautiful. It's well crafted. And also thanks for pointing out the lyrics because I didn't even notice that we could read the lyrics, and I was just kind of casually scrolling through them and I was like, oh, these are quite nice.
They're very good. Yeah.
Yeah. So because my favorite track was actually Butterfly, and now that I've seen the lyrics for it, I like it even more. So yeah, it just felt kind of nostalgic, dreamy, pleasant. And for me, this is definitely the kind of thing that I would listen to as just background music or if I'm trying to relax. And oh, geez, sorry. Giant peal of thunder in the background just startled me.
I heard that.
Yeah.
I thought I heard fireworks outside. I don't know if that was from you or from here, but I heard something.
Yeah, I think that was thunder. It's pouring. So
oh, how goth of you.
Right?
Oh, aren't you so goth?
Oh, nothing says goth like jumping out of your skin when you hear thunder. Yeah, I thought this was a real treat to listen to. My only gripe is that I feel like it's a little bit short, but you know, that's okay. It's short but sweet.
Yeah, I tend to prefer I don't know. I used to like very long albums, but I actually tend to prefer the more closer to 10 track album because I feel like a lot of times bands tend to run out of steam with more tracks than that, and the album feels like it's kind of drags on.
Like I feel
especially
like
with smaller bands, but yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Oh, I forgot I was supposed to give a stars rating, right?
Yeah, you don't have to, but if you feel so inclined.
Sure, I feel inclined. I'll give it a 4 out of 5. I think it had a nice variety. I think one or two tracks sounded a little bit samey, but I mean they're going for the whole floaty dream-like thing going on, so of course it's going to sound a little bit samey, but nice variety, comfy. I liked it. 4 out of 5.
All right, so my take of it, I'm with both of you in that I really did enjoy the album. I definitely agree with you, Chelsea, about the nostalgic quality of it. I got a very, very strong nostalgia around the music that I was really into in the 90s, especially when I was first getting into goth. There was a lot of that sort of gothic shoegaze, dream pop amalgamation that was happening in the 90s around labels like Seraph and Project. That definitely this harkens a lot to. You get a lot of Cocteau Twins in there. You get some Bel Canto, a little bit of Lycia, things like that. So a lot of those sort of feels of those bands that the music is very heavy on atmosphere, yet also has that floating melody above that atmosphere. So it's got this very dense sort of gothic, spooky, tense texture underlying the tracks as a whole, with the floating melody kind of weaving in and out of it. But then you have those moments where the tension of that texture goes away and lets the melody go free for a while. And I love that pull and release of that tension that are in a lot of, especially the more balladic tracks like Little Lilies that you like, Count. That's a good example of one that has this good, strong texture with a very beautiful melody, both sung and instrumental, weaving in and out of it. But then that big reverb texture drops out at one point and lets the melody kind of go on its own before it comes back in again. And I love that pull and release and that texture to the tracks. But as is oftentimes.
Are you making love to me right now, Trey? Is that what's happening?
I am making love to you right now. I'm making love to you with this album. But what I really liked about it, like a lot of the albums that I've liked in the past, is the variety of it. It isn't, like you were mentioning, that sort of samey, every track is fitting this mold that makes it fit into a goth rock or a death rock or just a very sort of static thing that can be something that's a little more common in the more straightforward Gothic, with a capital G, albums out there. And I tend to find that I enjoy those albums, but they don't grab me as long as one that sort of twists around and changes things up and gives me that variety and change of pace, because I don't like hearing the same thing over and over again. Even if I like that thing that I'm hearing, I do want to change it up and I do want to hear something different. So this album definitely gave me that. And of course, like a lot of albums, I tend to be a huge fan of the first track on so many albums, because a lot of bands love to be experimental on the quote-unquote intro track. Though this band, unlike some of those intro track bands, it's actually a full song with lyrics rather than we've got this 1 or 2 minute giant orchestral or giant experimental statement that we put in there, and it gets you really excited, and then the rest of the album has nothing to do with that at all.
Mm-hmm.
This one, it kind of fits in, though the first track does stand out, and it isn't really something that reappears significantly later in the album, but it was at least a fully conceived piece, rather than just that little element. So I really enjoyed that. I loved what they did with the vocals, and the one thing that I really was impressed with this band, we've talked about how it's very atmospheric and very heavy on the reverb. However, they don't drown the music in reverb, and I think that's a key element that's hard to do, to get that rich texture and that ambiance, that ethereal ambiance, and that feeling of floating without everything being awash in this reverb, so you can't understand the lyrics, you can't make out the melody lines. And that works in, some genres. I mean, I love my shoegaze and, my Bloody Valentine and stuff like that, which is all about just that oppressive texture, or, some of the slow doom metal type things, or your Sun O, which is all just a textural exercise. That I enjoy, but this had that good combination of that texture with those melodies and stuff, still retaining their crystal clarity and still being followable. And the lyrics, especially since they are very expressive, very abstract, not very literal, which is another thing I like, but you can understand them throughout. There are a handful of songs where they got a little bit more buried, but for the most part, the lead singer's voice is close up front, very clear, with the wash of the reverb and that texture following behind it. So those are just some of the things I really enjoyed. But yeah, like I was already mentioned, the variety of instrumentation. Sometimes you'll have more guitar-driven ones, both in the chordal, strumming type style of more rock style guitar. Also the finger-picked melodic style that's somewhat reminiscent of classic goth as well. The little finger-picked with the very chiming guitar tone. So you have a lot of that as well as some more, gets a little harsher on some instances, starts veering into a little bit of the metal-ish, but very tangentially, very just touching at it, but not really going in there. But it was nice to see that variety of sound. So yeah, overall, I really enjoyed it. I didn't love every single track, but all tracks brought something to the table, and they were all very, very good to listen to. So I think I'd also give it a 4.5.
And that is the level of explication around music that I wish I possessed. But very well spoken, Trey. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, let's wrap up with Sinister Suggestions.
So you've got to be interested in death. It's the last great taboo. It's the only taboo left.
Precisely. I mean, why is it, do you think, that everyone in here is dressed in black? It's a celebration of death.
No, I just like the clothes.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the clothes look good. Yeah, I mean, Def looks good. Charles Manson, yeah? No, he was cool.
Don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm actually a vampire.
Sinister Suggestions.
I, like many other gamers, am anxiously anticipating Cyberpunk 2077 to come out in a couple of weeks. And so naturally, oh, don't even laugh, I know. I'm sweating too,
I
don't worry.
want to talk about it.
But so I've been listening to like lots of cheesy 80s synthwave, reading cyberpunk novels, all of that, just to get into the mood for the next 3 months. And so I decided that I was going to go listen to some synthwave that I haven't listened to in a long time. So I didn't even know that Carpenter Brute had a they released another album in like a year or two ago. It was called Leather Teeth, which, aside from, you know, like gross imagery aside, like that just makes me deeply uncomfortable saying the words leather teeth. But it's just awesome. Like, I love the artwork. I love all the B-movie footage that they used in the music videos. It's just so gory and over the top and cheesy. And it really does feel like a great love letter to the 80s. And I just think that everyone should look at it and listen to it, because it's a treat.
I replayed Deus Ex Mankind and Deus Ex Revolution recently just because I was like, I want to play Cyberpunk, for fuck's sake. I guess this is the next best thing. But yeah, I feel like if I just don't talk about it, I won't jinx it, and maybe it will actually come out this time on this release date. But we'll see.
Fingers crossed.
Trey, what about you?
So I struggle with this because I haven't really I haven't been experiencing a lot of new things lately. Been kind of in a funk and stuck with work. I've been doing a lot of audiobooks.
So sadness.
Yeah, sadness is my sinister suggestion.
Just try it. Sadness.
Try it. It'll do you good or bad. Yeah. But I mean, I've been listening to some audiobooks, but none of them have really like totally jumped out at me. I was just like grabbing random ones, and a couple of them have been decent, but nothing amazing. Been trying to throw some stuff on Spotify, but I haven't been listening as much to some of my music recommendation sites as I usually do, and been more focusing on news and science and educational content. So I don't really have anything, unfortunately.
That's fine. That's fine. I will share mine then. So my suggestion is another Netflix show, and this one, a Netflix original. And this one is called Dorohedoro. It's an anime. And actually, I like this show for a lot of the same reasons I liked Happy, which was something I recommended a while ago, like a few months. I don't know. Time has no meaning anymore, whenever it was. And that the story is wild and absurd, but the characters are grounded and complex. And there's also humor is kind of written throughout the show, even though it is dark and weird. And it's really stylized as well, which is something that I enjoy. I think is really important, at least for me, in a good anime. Like, for example, I really like slice of life animes that are just, they're slow and they're wholesome and they make you feel warm and fuzzy. One of my favorites is what the hell is it called? Suritama. Which is a fishing anime, but one of the reasons I like it so much is because of how beautiful the art is, and it's not like an insane level of style. We brought up Chelsea. You brought up Carpenter Brute. It's not like insanely stylized like Blood Machines was. Actually, did you see Blood Machines?
I did not.
It's you can only see it on Shudder, so I got the 7-day free trial, but it's basically a music video for Carpenter Brute, but it's a short sci-fi film, and it's kind of like Kung Fury, sort of. You should check it out. Anyway, it's not hyper stylized, but it has a unique. It doesn't make it feel like it's the same as every other anime, basically, and I like that. I like some kind of flair, some kind of design care that's put in. It actually kind of made me feel the same feels as the first time I watched Cowboy Bebop in high school, which was the first and last time I watched Cowboy Bebop. There was, I think, the second anime I ever saw. I think the first anime I watched was the one with the boy who's in the suit of armor, and I can't, the
Full Metal Alchemist.
That was the first one, but it in a way that it was like the world and the characters were interesting, and it didn't stick to just one style where you kept episode to episode. There was something new thrown in, something new and interesting. And Dorohedoro specifically has a lot of different genres. It's super violent. There's a lot of body horror in a lot of really fun, interesting ways. But it's also really lighthearted and intimate. You do get some of those slice of life elements where you have like these loving shots of food being cooked. But they do it in their own style. So sometimes there's like blood splattered on the counter or whatever, just like little weird things like that. So that's what I like about the story. To just kind of give a general overview of the story, it revolves around this guy who has a lizard head, like this big ass lizard head, and he's running around putting people in his mouth because there's a man that lives inside of him. And he's been transformed by a sorcerer and doesn't remember how. And so he's shoving people in his jaws to the guy that lives inside of him remembers who it was. So he's trying to find the person that did that to him. The story kind of plays out like a buddy comedy in a way, but it's in a fantasy world. And so it's grounded, but it's weird. And that's one of the things I actually like about. It bothers me when shows take place in a fantasy world, especially anime, because you can do anything with animation. And it bothers me when they kind of play it too safe. And they don't play with, like, I don't know, physics or your expectations of narrative storytelling or the way that characters are supposed to behave or the way the characters should look. So you have a lot of weird, if you have a world with magic and zombies and stuff, you should be subverting expectations and doing like off the wall crazy shit. And I think they do that really well while also grounding it in something that it makes sense because the connections between the characters are so strong. Sorry, I'm really going on about this anime, but I really enjoyed it. It's like 10 episodes. It's on Netflix. And so you should check it out if you get a chance.
Have you read the manga of it? Because they're quite a bit ahead of the anime. It's there's quite a bit of story left.
Manga is, yeah, I just don't buy it anymore. I used to buy comics as well a lot. And I don't know. I just haven't had the time.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, I can watch shows and do something else, that kind of thing. But yeah.
Yeah, I feel you. Same.
And that's what I've been doing. I've been watching a lot of, like, I'll put, I'm watching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure because I've never seen that. So I'll throw that on in the background because that's a whole completely different feeling because it's just silly. There's also a lot of body horror in that. But so, yeah, I've just been watching a lot of shows in the background. All right, well, that's my suggestion. So, Chelsea, thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely lovely.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
I will, of course, have links in the show notes, and I will have mentioned this in the introduction, but can you just, on the way out, let people know where they can find you online?
Okay, so if you want to find me online and watch me rant about stupid stuff, you can follow my YouTube channel. It's Rose Nocturnalia, and that's also my Instagram handle if you want to see me taking pictures of me. And that's pretty much it.
That's what the internet's made of.
Exactly.
It is, yeah. And cats, yeah. And with that, our episode comes to a close. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. We're going to be returning on the 16th of this month for another episode. We're going to be doing a follow-up to our disability and mental health episode from last year. We're going to be bringing on the same group of people to talk about living with a disability while being goth and the kind of challenges that presents also in broader culture. So I hope you will come back and join us for that. If you want to support what we do and keep us on the air, you can head over to patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. You can get some extra rewards and bonuses and things like that. But of course, I really appreciate you being here and listening, commenting, and just enjoying the show. That's enough for me. I really appreciate it. So that's it. Until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.